Okay, so injuries from running are caused by a multitude of factors. And one of these factors, as Rhudy talked about the other day, is impact loading and its effect on, as part on causing these injuries. And impact loading itself is going to be affected by the type of foot strike pattern that one is exerting as they land. So the most common is the rear foot strike, but unfortunately not only is the most common, but also is associated with the highest impact loading, then going to a midfoot strike, and then forefoot strike with lower impact on landing. Right, so wearable technology may be useful in identifying foot strike patterns on individual strides and help runners that are training to transition from a higher risk or a higher impact stride to a lower impact pattern. Previously, these are just two examples, previously machine learning has been used to identify other types of gait events at the stride level using data from wearable devices. So what we're trying to do here is we're using machine learning to identify foot strike patterns in individual strides from runners. All right, so we used data from a previous study that was conducted to do our work. So we had 55 runners with a variety of natural foot strike patterns, and they ran on instrumented treadmill at a self-selected speed. And we had them, during their running on the treadmill, they had 5 strikes each of rear, mid, and forefoot. So it gave us a total of over 800 strides that we could analyze. And each one was verified for, is it rear, mid, or forefoot, from visual inspection. And while they were running, they wore a 1D accelerometer on the distal part of their tibia. All right, so that's the data that we're going to be basing all this on, is the 1D accelerometer data, which was filtered. I'll talk about that a little bit later, or come back to that a little bit later, but filtered at 60 hertz. It was an instrumented treadmill, so their whole run was broken down stance by stance using the data from the force plate, and then all the data were time normalized to 100% of stance. Right, so first thing we looked at is, what's the big picture here? So we looked at it in aggregate, separated by the foot strike pattern, mid, rear, and forefoot strike. So what this plot is showing here is the darker lines, hopefully you can see it in the back, are the mean of all of the runners, all of the strides for that foot strike pattern. And then the colored bands are the 95% confidence interval, about 2 standard deviations above and below that, again, across all the strides for that pattern. So just visually, what we can see is that there are distinct patterns emerging for the different types of foot strike patterns. So for the location of the mins in the stance phase, the magnitude of the mins and the max during the stance phase, the number of local mins and maxes, a lot of things we can visually distinguish between these 3 foot strike patterns. And we also see that by about 40% of stance phase is where most of these obvious differences are occurring, and then they kind of all converge to the same looking type of pattern, this is acceleration data, after about 40% of stance phase. So what we are using is, we are looking at the phase states, so these are broken down into integer values of accelerometer data, 0 to 100. So we want to use these raw states. We're not trying to beforehand use max and min or how many bumps there are. We're going to let the machine learning process take care of that. So using raw accelerometer data, can we distinguish these foot strike patterns? And also, how much of the data do we really need? How much of the stance data do we need to make this to distinguish them? All right, so this is not an ML talk, but I'll just briefly get into this. We use an artificial neural network to do this. Very briefly, artificial neural network is a very fancy nonlinear regression. If you're in ML, I'm very sorry for describing it that way, but we can think of it that way. Big nonlinear regression. Again, our inputs or our features are the time-normalized accelerometer data, and we're using that to classify the stride as forefoot, midfoot, or rear foot. So 3 possible outputs. For those of you in the ML community, we use 1 hand layer and up to 10 neurons, but it's scaled with the amount of data that we were using. And we compared 3 subsets using 100% of our stance, using the first 75%, and using the first 40%, where it appears most of the information, most of the differences are occurring. Now, a little bit about using artificial neural networks and other types of regression. They're very sensitive to the data you use to train it, the data you use to validate it. So you can come up with a completely different model depending on which samples you include in which set. So to kind of even out that, we actually made 101 models by randomizing what data were in our training set and what data were in our validation set. And then we have 101 models that we're going to put things through, and then we use majority voting. So whatever FSP the majority of them say it is what we're going to say yes. That's what we're identifying it as. Right. And we used leave-two-out cross-validation in order to build some distributions here. So basically, we train the network on all but 2 of our subjects. We train 101 of our models. We then put the 2 subjects that the model has never seen into that, and then we make identifications based on that. So basically what this is looking at is, on average, how accurate are our models at identifying novel subjects? Right, so we got out, using the 3 subsets of our data, we got these box plots here. Again, this is only looking at subjects that models have never seen before and identifying their footstrike patterns. So using all of the data, on average, we're seeing about 92% mean identification. And then when we use only the first 40%, it does drop down to, looking at the means here, still about 89%. The median drops from about 95 to 90%. None of these differences are statistically significant, but we do see a trend going on here as we take less data. Skip over that for time. All right, so moral of the story, we do get overall good accuracy, and we did use a range of anthropometries and speeds that our runners were using as they went. So we trend towards improving our accuracy the more of the stand space we use. Most of the error I had to skip that was confusion between a midfoot strike and a forefoot strike. Now, a drawback of doing it this way using just the raw accelerometer data, we don't get that physical insight as to what is the machine learning using to differentiate the 3 strike patterns. We're getting good results, but really we don't know right now why we're getting those good results. And as with most machine learning things, the more data we have, the better these models should do. So what we want to do is collect more data. Again, this is all done on a treadmill. We want to go into the real world or into the wild and see, can we apply it there? Because that's going to be the ultimate mission is, can we in real time or near real time identify foot strike patterns in order to train runners to move to a more anterior foot strike pattern? And thank you for your time.